You can go ahead, Sheikh.
Okay, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma lakal hamdu kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhika wa 'azimi sultanik. Wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma 'allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna 'ilma. Ya Allah, teach us that which is beneficial for us and bless us in the knowledge you have granted us and increase our knowledge. Today, inshallah, my this episode is devoted to studying one of the greatest pioneers in the academic study of Islam in North America, the Islamic way. This is about Ismail Raji Al-Faruqi, rahmahullah, who was a martyr for the cause of Islam. Before I do so, I would urge myself and everyone to pray for our brothers and sisters in Gaza and Palestine. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah remove the oppression and bless them to gain the freedom and dignity bestowed on them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defeat the oppressors and turn their plans and plots against them. Now, coming to our topic today, inshallah, since this is this is about a thinker who has contributed tremendously to the intellectual awakening and reform of Islamic thought and Islamic activism. I cannot do justice to this topic, as I have mentioned before, in this short time. So I can only provide you glimpses of this great person, great intellectual, great activist, great intellectual mujahid, I would prefer to call him, to the cause of Islam, who gave his life. He gained the Shahada. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept him and his wife, who were brutally martyred. Anyway, the topic today, the session today will cover about his milieu briefly and the education and how he transitioned from being an advocate of Uruba or Arabism or Arab nationalism to Islam, and how he was a brilliant academic and an intellectual activist. He did not simply live in the ivory tower, but he was an intellectual who was concerned in bettering the state of the Ummah. And I will mention briefly about his enduring legacy and some of the testimonials of his students and friends, inshallah, and briefly pieces of wisdom, gems of wisdom that we can benefit from. Ismail Raji Al-Faruqi was a Muslim philosopher, professor, very acclaimed professor, educationist, and reformer of Palestinian American origin. Because he was originally from Palestine, he later migrated to United States of America. So maybe we may better refer to him as a Palestinian American origin. He made enduring contributions to the study of Islam in the academic study of Islam in North America and the world. And also he was an advocate of educational reform for a renaissance in the Muslim world. And he contributed tremendously to the field of comparative religions from an Islamic perspective. His studies focused on the history. Of course, he was a man who specialized in the history of religion, phenomenology of religion. This is a method of study of religion, not as if it were like a piece of wood, but as the believers experience it, believers express it, believers would want to speak about it. So it is from within. And Islamic thought, an interfaith dialogue, of course, his understanding of comparative religion, his deep understanding of Islam and the state of the world convinced him there is a great need for not only a reawakening of Islamic thought, but also for Muslims to engage in interfaith dialogue so that we can create a better world. He left a rich legacy of works and lasting imprint on the academic study of Islam and, of course, Islamic thought in America. He was born into a milieu of political colonialism. Of course, some of what we have said before applies here as well. So I don't want to repeat that. I want to mention something else. So, a milieu of political colonialism and neo-colonialism. Of course, this would also include the Orientalism, the Islamophobia, which is a legacy of the Crusades, which we continue to experience. We are living in the midst of it as we see the double standards practiced by the Western Europe, especially the leaders. Uh, when they consider the Muslim life as nothing as compared to the life of white people, white race, whom they consider as part of them, and then the othering of Muslims, othering of others. The experience, this milieu of political colonialism, neo-colonialism, Orientalism, Islamophobia, crusade mindset, everywhere, pervading everywhere, and hiding or even expressing itself in so many ways, and the debilitating effects on the Muslim Ummah. We are still witnessing it. He also witnessed the horrors of the creation of Israel that was planted in the heart as a dagger in the heart of the Muslim world. That happened in 1948. And Farooqi lost his home and homeland at the hands of the Zionist settlers. He also lived through the 1967 Middle East debacle and the collapse of Arab nationalism advocated by Abdul Nasser. His studies and career were devoted to taking up the enormous challenges facing the Ummah in the wake of these new realities. His experiences, reflections made him a tireless intellectual mujahid, activist. He was not simply an intellectual sitting in the ivory tower theorizing, but he put into practice his new vision for reforming and making the condition of Muslims, bettering the condition of Ummah everywhere. His name is joined while thinking of his contributions, especially in the academic field. We should join him with another two great pioneers. Next week we will talk about Fazlur Rahman, uh, who, who was a brilliant professor academic, and Hussein Nasser, who is still living because he is the youngest of the three. So Farooqi was one of the three prominent Muslim academics who left an erasable mark, Islamic mark on the academic study of Islam in North America. Of course, because everything that is happening in North America will have influences, repercussions for all over the world, because we are living in a milieu of globalization, and of course the ideas travel, and these students who were trained by these great scholars the students will be coming from all over the world, and they will carry these ideas to all over the Muslim world, so they have a lasting effect. It was a time in North America and Europe when the study of Islam, was making an appearance as a field of study, research, and discourse at the universities. So each one of these three scholars made their specialized contributions. Fazlur Rahman was his contribution to Islamic thought, Sayyid Hussein Nasr in Islamic mysticism or Tasawwuf, and Ismail Farooqi towards the study of Islam as an area in the academic study of religion, and also his contributions to the Islamization of knowledge, of course, and in Islamic thought in general. Now, coming to his education, Ismail Raji Al-Faruqi is known as Ismail Farooqi or simply as Farooqi, was born in Jaffa, Palestine, into an influential religious family. He was born in 1921. His father was an alim and qadi. He began his religious education at the mosque school, the madrasa, and at home at the hands of his father. In the secondary level, he joined the Dominican French school, Jesuit school, and qualified to enter the American University of Beirut, where he finished his bachelor's degree in philosophy. In 1945, he returned to Palestine and he was appointed. He occupied another position before, and finally he was appointed as a district governor of Galilee in Palestine. Unfortunately, following the creation of Israel in 1948, although he resisted, he tried to he joined the movement to free the Palestine. He thought he would be fitting better by contributing to the cause of Palestine and Islam through his studies and academic career. So for this purpose, with this in mind, he migrated to USA. Of course, very, very intelligent person. He climbed the academic ladder quickly as he earned 2 master's degrees, not one, first from Indiana University and another from Harvard in 1951. And in 1952, he earned a PhD degree in philosophy from Indiana University. So he received a thorough training in the Western philosophical traditions, and of course, now there is a gap to be filled. Having mastered the Western tradition, intellectual tradition, while he had only a very standard understanding of Islam, he realized he need to delve deeper and he need to have a solid training in the Islamic tradition of scholarship. So where he would go for that? To achieve this goal, he went to Al-Azhar, the reputable Muslim university in Egypt. So he stayed there from 1954 to 1958. And let him explain why he did so. Because it was almost an intellectual crisis in his life, because after I got my doctorate in Western philosophy, I realized the state of my ignorance of Islam and remoteness from the Islamic legacy. So he discovering his identity as a Muslim. So here he is with a mastery of the Western intellectual tradition, but deficient in the understanding of his own religious tradition, intellectual tradition of Islam. So I retreated and entered Al-Azhar University to learn anew, but in a very quick and intensive special program, as if I was doing another doctorate in Islamic studies in 3 years after spending at the quarters of Al-Azhar. So it was an intensive and deep study of the Islamic intellectual tradition. So now he is well equipped to synthesize the two streams, intellectual streams, two traditions, and contribute uh, not only to the Islamic world but to the Western, the knowledge tradition. From 1959 to 1961, he served as a visiting professor at the Institute of Islamic Studies, where I also studied, McGill University, where I also studied, where he also studied Christianity and Judaism in the Faculty of Divinity at McGill. So he is a tireless researcher, an intellectual. He would not sit still. This is a remarkable, this is a remarkable, it's an inspiration for students and researchers and scholars alike. At McGill in the Divinity School, after a thorough research, he published his reputable work, Christian Ethics, a historical and systematic analysis of his dominant ideas. This is a very, very precious work, a critical work. Through his critical analytical study, he showed how the original teachings of Jesus, peace be upon him, had been corrupted by Saint Paul. So he would call Christianity the Pauline Christianity. It is not the Christianity as preached, as taught, as transmitted by Jesus, peace be upon him. So that was the reason why Islam and Christianity as it exists today differs in fundamental doctrines. So Paul was a persecutor of Christians, the true followers of Jesus. His work challenged the Christians to engage critically with the historical evolution of their doctrines. And that is why it did not go very well with the Christian scholars. Some members of the faculty opposed its publication because it would, if a Christian were to read it, it would shake his faith in Christianity. But others, like Professor Henrik Kramer, the Dutch theologian, linguist, and missiologist, described it as an impressive piece of work. And also another professor in McGill, Stanley Bryce Frost, he wrote a foreword to his work. He was also impressed by the critical nature of the work, but at the same time made another remark which would show us, even though he wrote this critical work on Christianity, he had not gained that peace of mind which would come as he transitioned from an Arabist into a true Muslim, where he would become at ease, at peace with himself. So when he wrote that book, he became a man of two worlds, intelligently at least, at ease with both, in both. He is at ease with the Islamic world and also with the Western world because he has mastered the two intellectual traditions, two streams, but he is not at peace with neither. Now he come to this state of peace and deep conviction later. So it was before his transition from an Arab nationalist into a committed Muslim, where he would become fired up with a new vision and ready to embark on a project of synthesis of the Eastern and Western traditions under the paradigmic worldview of Tawheed. This is the greatest unique contribution of Dr. Ismail Farooqi, may Allah have mercy on him. Farooqi initially advocated the theology of Arabism as opposed to pan-Islamism. He had been under the influence of the Arab nationalism of Jamal Abdel Nasser, but later, of course, one of the factors, or the other factors, thanks to his exposure to the leaders of MSA like Abdul Hamid Abu Sulaiman, Dr. Abdul Hamid Abu Suleiman, not just Abdul Hamid, he questioned the foundations of his earlier ideology. He confided, when he was hospitalized, he confided to one of the prominent leaders of Islam, Iqbal Ba Yunus, the leaders of MSA at that time. Until a few months ago, I was a Palestinian, an Arab, and a Muslim. Now I am a Muslim who happens to be an Arab from Palestine. So his Islamic identity overrides, of course, it does not contradict his Arab identity. This is his new concept now. So one can be a Muslim, that is the primary identity, then he can be an Arab. Or another person can be a Muslim, that's his primary identity. He can be an Indian or Malaysian or Pakistani or Egyptian or Saudi or North African or whatever. So Islam does not, although Islam should be the overriding, you know, identity, Islamic identity overriding, but it does not contradict the other identities. Through his contacts with brothers, I mentioned Abdul Hamid Abu Suleiman, he rediscovered the revolutionary vision of Islam, and it was like a homecoming for him. And he became one of them, one of the, the same like Dr. Ahmad Kutty and Dr. Abdul Hamid Abu Suleiman. They were the leaders of MSA at the time. MSA later would become Islamic Society of North America. So he became one of them, Farooqi became one of them, and in turn they looked towards him because he was an intellectual giant. They looked up towards him as their guide, mentor, and leader. So scholar par excellence. So reminiscing about his journey, he wrote, of course, there was a time in my life when all I cared about was proving to myself that I could win my physical and intellectual existence from the West. So he was a relentless pursuit of establishing himself, achieving that intellectual academic excellence and recognition from the professors, intellectuals of the West. But when I won it, it became meaningless. Because even though you may attain all these worldly goals and dreams, you may have climbed to the top. But then the question is, what after? Without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without centering our life on Allah, everything, all these pursuits become meaningless. That's why we have examples of people who climb to the peak and yet they have everything, rich and famous, but they find an emptiness in their life. And of course, this restlessness, this malaise, this anxiety, this worry lead to depression, and many of them even commit suicide. So I ask myself, Farooqi says, who am I? A Palestinian? A philosopher? A liberal humanist? My answer was, I am a Muslim. Now, of course, this is academic career we will discuss, but now special milestones in this career. At McGill, he befriended Dr. Fazlur Rahman, the other intellectual we are going to speak about in our next session, who took him with him because Dr. Fazlur Rahman was invited by Ayub Khan to head the Islamic Research Academy Center. So Fazlur Rahman took his friend Farooqi also with him because together they wanted to work on that new experiment to help the establishment of Islamic State based on their new ideas, fresh insights, having been trained Both of them were well trained in the Western as well as Islamic traditions. So at the Central Institute of Islamic Research, Karachi, Pakistan, of course, 1961 to 1963, he was there, but he became disillusioned with the mediocrity and cronyism rampant there, which he considered detrimental. He said all they are interested is to produce books after books without, they are not interested in objective academic research, painstaking research, but just producing books and books and books. And he also said, you will see somebody who is a chaprasi suddenly elevated to the rank of a professor. Just a metaphor he's using, meaning without any academic training or qualification or credentials, people are simply promoted to occupy and warm up the seats as professor, as a researcher, and whatnot. Farooqi returned to USA. He taught in the Department of Religion at Syracuse University first, 1964 to 1968. Of course, prior to that, he would be teaching in Chicago as well. And then, of course, this is the main assignment, and then became professor of Islamic Studies and History of Religions at Temple University for a long period of time from 1968 until his martyrdom in 1986. He had a long and illustrious professional career spanning almost 30 years. He wrote, edited, and translated 25 books, published more than 100 articles. He was also a visiting professor at more than 23 universities in Africa, Europe, Middle East, South and Southeast Asia, and he also served on the editorial boards of 7 major journals. Very, very unique contribution. During the 1970s, he established the Islamic studies programs, recruited and trained Muslim students, organized Muslim professionals, and established and chaired the Islamic Studies Steering Committee of the Academic Study of Religion from 1976 to 1982. He was also a very vigorous advocate of interfaith dialogues, and he actively took part in programs and conferences to present Islam on such occasions. Farooqi did not confine himself to academics. Instead, he was a lifelong activist, founder and leader of several institutions and associations. Muslim Student Association, which as we said, he joined after having interacted with Dr. Tutunji and Abdul Hamid Abu Sulaiman. And of course, he was later Islamic Society of North America, and also a host of professional associations such as the Association of the Muslim Social Scientists. Established also and served as the first president of the American Islamic College in Chicago. He was also responsible in 1981, established the International Institute of Islamic Thought, IIIT, making valuable contributions. He was also instrumental in founding the International Islamic University of Islamabad in 1980, as well as the International Islamic University of Malaysia in 1983. He also served as vice president of the Interreligious Peace Colloquium and the Muslim Jewish Christian Conference, and also served as president, I have mentioned, of the American Islamic College. Now, what is the characteristic of his thought? Farooqi started out, as mentioned, as an Arab nationalist. He was a product of Muslim modernism and Western embarrassment. But this is the initial first stage. Arab Muslim nationalist and Islamic modernism and Western imperialism. However, under the influence of MSA and Islamic revivalist ideas, he became a powerful advocate of Islamic revival. Islam replaced Arabism as the central thrust and guiding principle of his life and thought and works. He turned himself into an intellectual mujahid or warrior. He was a tireless, bold, brilliant. For Farooqi, the Muslims can reverse the current state, the abysmal state, this sad predicament of the Ummah. How can we save ourselves? How come up? Only through a total change involving multiple fronts. Dawah, we need to sell our ideas. A Muslim has to be a very, very able salesman. I remember him lecturing in one of the MSA conferences, annual conferences, that a Muslim should be a very, very skilled salesman. For a salesman, he need to know the market. It's a market of ideas. This is the real battle. Ideas. A Muslim should know how to sell, how to promote. He gives examples of the Prophet, how Prophet succeeded because he knew how to sell, how to promote, how to present. He virtually went to the marketplace of cars. He used every single opportunity to promote. So a Dahi should be a salesman of ideas because it's a battlefield of ideas and ideologies, religions. And a Muslim should know his own religion as well as other religions. He should know the ideas, the intellectual milieu, and he should be able to present Islam and its uniqueness. This is exactly what he has done in all of his works, which he wrote after that transition. And education, he called for an educational reform. Very, very solid contribution towards that. And then finally, he is the one who he coined the term Islamization of knowledge. Said Ummah can only rise again through his Razan Datar, meaning the thing that makes Islam justify the existence of what unique about Islam. Why Islam emerged? While there were multiplicity of religions and ideologies, what makes Islam unique? What is the rationale? What is the justification for the existence of Islam and the Muslims? And of course, he puts it beautifully. It is the Muslim's conception of himself as the Khalifa or vicegerent of Allah on earth that makes him the vortex of human history. Only as Allah's Khalifa, God's Khalifa, and only in proper commitment to the vision of Islam may then act responsibly in the totality of space and time. So one should be aware of this. This is my identity. I am a Khalif of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this Khilafah entails responsibilities. So I might act responsibly in space and time. He created a roadmap, vital hallmarks, milestones actually. Islamization of knowledge, character building, reform, and the reconstruction of institutions of family, economy, society, and polity in accord with the principles and precepts of the Sharia. Of course, he would be an institution builder. Dawah at all levels and all sources of power, spiritual, moral, and material, should be harnessed in the service of this mission and goal. The strategy of change he advocated was multi-dimensional, as spelled out clearly in his best work. I would consider best work. Tawheed, its implications for thought and life. Everybody should get this work. So, I would urge everyone who is a serious student and scholar of Islam to get this three works of course, all of the works are important, but I would emphasize here only three of them. The final 2 decades of his life were dedicated to this task. You know, his fervent appeal to the Muslim social scientists. Actually, this is like a wasiya that he left behind for the intellectuals. How long are we going to content ourselves with the crumbs that the West is throwing at us? Because he thought Muslims were not producing, interacting creatively, synthesizing, contributing creatively, making original contributions to knowledge. It is about time that we made our original contribution. As social scientists, we have to look back at our training and reshape it in the light of the Quran and the Sunnah, because it's not enough for us to study social sciences and pass on everything we have studied from the Western people as if it were the gospel truth. No, we need to critically look at it from the paradigm of Tawheed, the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and bring it out in a new mold. This is what our forefathers did. This was their original contribution to the study of history, law, and culture, because they did not simply borrow everything that they came across from various religious traditions. Rather, they critically examined them and they synthesized and presented, made original contributions. The West borrowed their heritage and put it in a secular mold. Is it asking for too much from us that we take knowledge? This knowledge the West took from us and put it in a secular mold? Is it not time for us to take it back from them and put it once again in the mold of Tawheed? Although Farooqi, okay, we already mentioned, there are three works I'm going to mention briefly. In his first work, Tawheed, he shows that Tawheed is central to Islam. It is central to everything Islamic. Islamic science, whether religious, moral, or natural, is essentially a quest to discover the order underlying the variegated world of multiplicity. So here is his approach. This cosmos, this nature, of course, all of this connected with, reading the book of nature with the insight from the book of Revelation. Because, Quran sees that harmony, uh, invites us to look at the harmony, order and pattern. There is a interdependence, interconnectedness. We can observe, if we observe carefully the nature. So Islamic science, whether religious, moral, nature, should be in a quest to discover the order underlying the world of multiplicity. The work affords the reader not only to look at the actual doctrine of Islam, the central, the pivotal, which is Tawheed, but also allows the reader to understand the doctrine from various perspectives. To explain the doctrine of Tawheed and its beautiful effects, he deals with a broad spectrum of topics, subjects, drawing elements from history, comparative religion, anthropology, philosophy, ethics, epistemology, archaeology, and other disciplines. His treatment of this subject is at once deep and erudite. It's a work of outstanding scholarship. It shows the profound implication of Tawheed for all aspects of human life and thought. The second work which we want to mention, Cultural Art of Islam, is a magnificent work which every Muslim should acquire. Every student, every thinker, every alim should acquire. He wrote with his wife, Dr. Louis Lumia Farooqi, Of course, Farooqi met her while he was studying in the USA, and she converted to Islam. He married her. She was also a brilliant academic. She was specialized in Islamic arts and music. She also made lasting contributions. And of course, together with his wife, a brilliant academic and professor, she was also a professor at Temple University many years until she was martyred with her husband Farooqi. Rahmahumullah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala receive them as martyrs. A comprehensive work that describes Islamic civilization. This magnificent work, published by Macmillan, it was published posthumously after a month after Farooqi's death, martyrdoms. It presents the entire worldview of Islam, its beliefs, traditions, institutions, and place in the cultures in which it has taken root. So this is a very valuable study, actually. Comprehensive introduction to the Islamic experience in history and the modern world. And this work is rich with photographs, illustrations, and original maps. It's an authoritative statement of the faith of Islam, as if Islam is speaking, presenting itself. So he knows how to sell the ideas. It's written for Muslims and non-Muslims alike. So it presents the essence of Islamic civilization from all aspects, from the everyday practice of Muslims worldwide to the Islamic legacy in art, science, law, politics, and philosophy. Another work of him, of course, there are other works, because of shortness of time, we would not mention them, but of course, we have covered the ideas, that main ideas in this presentation. So, entitled Islam and the Problem of Israel. This is the problem we are still suffering from. He says, people think that it it has neither precedent nor parallel in Islamic history. He says, because Muslim world has regarded it as another instance of modern colonialism. This is not just true. It's more than that. At best, a repetition of the Crusades. It is both, he says. Yes. It has no precedent, it's unprecedented, unparalleled. It is modern colonialism combined with the modern crusades. Neo-colonialism, intellectual colonialism, cultural colonialism. So he shows that Israel is neither of this. It's neither pure colonialism nor crusade, but it is both and more. In order to present this thesis, he delved deep into the true nature of Zionism. Of course, he has nothing against the original Judaism, because he considers it, the three religions related with so many common ideas. And all his life, he was engaged in interfaith dialogue to create that common understanding that we can agree to disagree, and each one should sell their ideas. So, but in this work, he wanted to show the true nature of Zionism, its history, and what is keeping it alive, and of course, Islamic's verdict on Israel today. And also, he answered the question whether a secular Palestine would solve the problem. No, it doesn't. It will not solve this problem. So, through incisive analysis, shows that only Islam had solved this issue, because Islam showed how Muslims, Christians, and Jews can live peacefully as equal citizens. So only Islam can resolve the issue fairly and equitably for the satisfaction of all. His main project, for which he is known, He coined the word Islamization of knowledge, Islamiyatul Marifa. In the Islamic educational movement in the modern age, Farooqi established a school of thought known as the Islamization of knowledge. His school of thought, his contribution to the reformulation or recasting of the knowledge, that is his school of thought, academic approach and practice is also being applied by hundreds of students teaching and conducting research at several universities. Because thanks to this initiative, the pioneer, trailblazing work, Farooqi was deeply concerned with the sorry. Why did he? Because he saw the sorry state of the education in the Muslim world in the post-colonial era of 1960s to the 1980s, because he saw the danger, how the Western secular, capitalist, orientalist, and Marxist approaches towards knowledge were presented to the Muslim world, third world, academia as the only valid approaches to knowledge. It's suicidal. Such a trend had an adverse effect on the Muslim mind and Islamic approach to knowledge, especially in religion, politics, agricultural practices, and economics. Of course, virtually all areas of knowledge. So we cannot take this for granted and transplant this in the Muslim world. These influences were sapping at the roots, the foundation of the Islamic worldview, Islamic way of life, Islamic practice, Islamic thought, Islamic civilization. Now, Farooqi and his wife were brutally martyred in their home in Pennsylvania on 27th of May, 1986. Rahimahullah. It was the early hours of the 18th day of Ramadan when Dr. Farooqi's wife, Dr. Ramia Farooqi, she was in the kitchen preparing suhoor meal. It was 2:30 early morning prior to dawn. She was preparing suhoor meal, and a silence broke into through the window of the house. He had a precision knife. He had been, they said he has been moving around, watching everything for 3 days. This was well planned and executed. Initially, he had brought a knife, and then he said, no, it would not be piercing enough to immediately to do a quick job, because he wanted to do that and escape. So he broke into the house, stabbed her to death, stabbed her repeatedly, and she fell down. And then he started, his daughter also alerted, came, and he stabbed her too, and the screams that alerted Dr. Farooqi. Of course, daughter pretended that she's dead, but she was not dead. Farooqi came and confronted the man because he has been trained also in his attempt to combat the settlers in Israel, in Palestine actually. So although he struggled, because suddenly he woke up and then, he could not uh, knock him out, but the assailant quickly stabbed him to death and he escaped. Of course, the murderer was convicted and condemned to life in prison, but the mystery remains, why this brutal murder? Because Farooqi was a humble man, a kind man. He was a generous man. He had the hospitality of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and his house was open to everybody. And they used to partake meals with him, his students, and everyone. This is a great human being, warm, always smiling, always energetic, a truly human being, gentleman. So the question remains, was it politically motivated? because of Farooqi's outspoken views, because his work, Islam and the problem of Palestine. He, it really tackled the issue analytically, critically, incisively. The criminal died in prison, although several attempts were made to contact him to get to know the secret. Why did he do so and who were behind it? All the attempts failed. They did not allow any contact with him, and he died. They say natural death in jail. So it remains a mystery, but his legacy endures. You cannot. As Parvez Mansour, one of the Swiss academic and intellectual, wrote, several obituaries were written about him by intellectuals, scholars all over the Muslim world and everywhere. So, but this scholar nailed, you may be able to kill the scholar, martyr him, but his pen is mightier than the blade, than the knife of the assassin. There are no better words, when we think about this sad. I still remember that, we took, I was an imam at the Jami Mosque at the time, director and imam, and, uh, just like all over the Muslim, North America and Europe, Muslim Student Association, sent telegrams to Reagan at the time. He was the president of America, you know, to make sure that a proper investigation is done and the criminal is brought to justice. I remember sending that telegram. At that time, it was telegram. But how do we, this is a sad story when we think about it. This man only lived 63 years, and the contribution he made is indeed remarkable. If he had lived another 20 years, how much he would have contributed. But of course, Allah has a wisdom, Allah's plan, Allah knows what's better for him. So, but we say, think not of those who are slain in the way of Allah as dead. Nay, they are living with their Lord, they have provision. Testimonials after testimonials we have from his students and friends, because he has produced generations of scholars all over the world, in North America as well as in Europe and Muslim countries. But I will take one testimony from one of his most devoted students who expressed indebtedness to Farooqi because John Esposito had entered the department, tumble Islamic studies. He only wanted to take one course. He did not intend, because he was a Christian by training, a pastor by training. He wanted to pursue his research, his PhD in Christian, in the area of Christianity, actually. But then, because of the inspiration of Farooqi, he specialized, he earned his doctorate uh, researching under the directorship supervision of Dr. Farooqi. So he described Farooqi, he knows him, not just as a supervisor, not as just an academic, but as a friend, because Esposito would describe how students and others would gather in his house, they will be sharing meal together. He used to take his wife with very warm atmosphere, very open, very friendly. He was creative, imaginative, challenging, provocative, charming, and yes, committed. Islam and the teaching of Islam embodies his faith, profession, and vocation. In the end, one can safely say that given his belief that a Muslim was one whose submission is a lifelong struggle to realize or actualize God's will, Ismail Farooqi was indeed a mujahid. He was indefatigable, a bundle of enormous energy who seemed like a relentless whirlwind. His profession was also his vocation. He was a man driven by scholarship and faith. He was one of the great multitaskers of his time, writing, speaking nationally and globally, running the Islamic Studies program, recruiting students from across the Muslim world, and establishing major organizations and a think tank, the International Institute of Islamic Thought. You never knew where he might be at any given moment. What a summation of the contribution. It's in just summarizing the achievements of this great thinker. Professor Khurshid Ahmad, a Pakistani intellectual and close friend of Farooqi, said about his transformation: Farooqi's intellectual, spiritual, and ideological journey that began as a Muslim Arabist had made its transition to his role as an Islamist Arab. His stay in America and his encounters with the tentacles of the West Islamophobia had contributed to this change. Iqbal has captured this phenomenon of Islam reborn in a beautiful couplet. Of course, this happened to Iqbal also. He had gone to the West, studied the Western philosophy, and then, of course, he immerses himself in Islam. The onslaughts of the tempests of the West have made Muslims into true Muslims, as ravages of tumultuous storms in high waters transform drops of water into real pearls. So, this is the transitioning. Now, Farooqi has left behind immeasurable wisdom, treasure house of wisdom. We cannot do justice to it. But let me mention a few. He sums up the quintessence, the essence of Islam. In few words, the essence of Islamic civilization is Islam, or that the essence of Islam is Tawheed. It is Tawheed that gives Islamic civilization its identity. Islam regards religion as the way to conduct life on earth. Religion has no other business than this purpose. It is a dimension of earthly life, when that life is lived morally under God, responsibility to nature, to oneself and society. So Muslim who is committed to the doctrine of Tawheed will consider himself responsible as responsible person. Responsibilities towards nature, towards himself, and towards his society, meaning towards others. Allah is the supreme source of all good. And the belief that God is the source of all good is also source of all good. So it behoves every human being to recognize always that whatever Allah decrees is always good for us. For He decrees everything for a good purpose. To educate any other view is the negation of Tawheed or belief in the oneness of Allah. The Quran forbids Muslims not to think anything but good of Allah. So the question, what's happening to Muslims in Kurdistan and everywhere? The answer is provided here. Allah has a purpose. The history did not stop there, will not stop there. There is another phase. Islamic sense of identity does not contradict the individual identities of the communities that comprise the Ummah. Because Islam does not negate, a Muslim can be first a Muslim, then he can be a Palestinian Arab from Palestine, or he can be an Egyptian Arab, or he can be an Indian, he can be a Pakistani, he can be a Malaysian, he can be an American, he can be a European, whatever. So you can have different identities within this ultimate umbrella identity of Islam. Renders it lesser, but of course, all other identities become lesser because the common bond that unites all Muslims are paradigmical, are pivotal, are central. Islam teaches God is the ultimate source of the cosmos, so it is a cosmos and not chaos. As God has placed an order and pattern in the creation so that human beings can study, observe, and use it to serve the function, the mission as the Khalifa of Allah. It is therefore amenable to human exploration and service. It allows human beings to realize the divine will, because the divine will for us is to serve as the Khulafa. So, science, there is no contradiction between Islam and science. So, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower His mercy on Dr. Farooqi and his wife. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the highest status in Jannatul Firdaus with the prophets and the martyrs and the saints and the righteous. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspire us to learn from these great icons of the Islamic tradition in the West, in North America. Because we are in North America, we need to benefit from all scholarship, and especially from our own scholars who are pioneers in Islamic work, Islamic thought, Islamic activism. So let us learn from them, and let us move forward this ummah by building on their legacies, on their contributions, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.